I am so excited to talk to Emily Boese, a nutritionist and medical herbalist. Let me briefly introduce her before I bring her on. Emily Boese is a qualified nutritionist and medical herbalist with over a decade of experience and currently lives in her hometown of Regina in Canada. She runs online herbal medicine workshops and seminars and does freelance writing for natural health companies and maintains a clinical practice. Emily was the research and development manager for a traditional plant medicine company in New Zealand and has worked in many areas of the field of natural medicine, including formulating and producing plant medicines, educating retailers, pharmacists, and the public, customer service, technical support, copywriting, clinical practice, and the hard graft of working in a herb garden and hand harvesting herbs for commercial use. She also worked as the in-store nutritionist at Choices Market in Kelowna, where she supported community programs such as Chefs in the Classroom and the Start Fresh Project. Emily has been featured on Empire Radio Now, Kelowna Now's in Focus, Health Post in New Zealand, Best Health Magazine, Aroma Culture Magazine, and CBC Radio. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Sekandari.
Well, I just briefly shared a little bit about your background and your expertise, but can you tell me a little bit more about what got you interested in herbs and how you use them with the people you serve?
Yeah, I've loved herbs for a long time, although it didn't really culminate into a professional experience until my 20s. But when I was growing up, my family, we lived in a small town and we always there were little snippets of it. We used chamomile for if you couldn't sleep and peppermint for an upset stomach. So there was a little bit of it around all the time. But it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I became interested in herbs professionally. And I was a kid who had lots and lots of ear infections, and I had strep throat really recurrently. And I just had tons of antibiotics and just had to keep taking them again and again. And so for me, what really was transformative was when I started using herbs and nutrition to support my immune system. And suddenly I didn't get ear infections anymore. I didn't have to have antibiotics nearly as regularly. And so that was really a shift for me. And it just kind of made me realize that there was this whole world out there of something else that I could do to support my own health. And so that was really where I kind of got into the path of using herbs.
That's so interesting because I'm also a big believer and a big fan of using herbs and essential oils and a lot of natural solutions for mental health. And I'm a big believer in trying the least invasive and safest approach to treating mental illness. So, of course, lifestyle changes and herbs, along with other natural treatments, are my go-to. But can you talk about how we can start using herbs for our mental and physical health, some ways that we can incorporate that into our life, like you said, with the chamomile and the peppermint?
Yeah. Yeah. So I, like you, I see a lot of people with stress and mental health issues in my clinical practice. So I'm a clinical herbalist. I work with people one-on-one to support their health. And even if people don't come in the door with stress or mental health issues as their main concern, it always comes up. And I think when you treat people holistically, you're going to ask about, how their stress levels are and how their support system is and things like that. That's really important to treat the whole person, right? And so, yeah, I do believe really very much in supporting health in a very holistic kind of way. And I, like you, really like to support stress and mental health issues in the least interventionist way possible to start with. I do, however, always recommend that people, work with a practitioner, especially if they have big concerns or if they are on other medications as well. And I'm not anti-medication. I just really like to use, like you said, the lowest intervention to start with. So herbs overall for stress issues work better when we look at them long term. So none of these are kind of quick fixes. That's not really how herbs work. I feel like they tend to work in a way that sort of nourishes and supports the body. They build resilience in the nervous system. So it's really about adding in these little extra supports along the way as you work towards supporting your mental health in all the ways that you possibly can.
So that's really great. I just love how versatile herbs can be, and we can use them for so many ailments. So So can you talk a little bit about how they can be used to bring balance to our body and help us with managing stress? And then if you want to go into mentioning some of the herbs that you like to use for balancing our body and stress management.
So herbs work in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that I always think is really interesting about them is because they are plants, essentially, they're complex, they're really sophisticated. So they have a lot of different mechanisms and ways that they can support our health. So one of the main ways that plants can really support our health and our mental health specifically is because they're full of nutrients. So just like the food that you eat has vitamins and minerals and enzymes in it, so do the herbs that we eat. One of the best examples of this that I love using is nettle. Nettle is a weed. It's like the stingy nettle that you might accidentally run into on a walk. But nettle is full of minerals and vitamins and all those kinds of things. And our body, our brain, and our nervous system requires nutrients to function just like the rest of our organs, right? So having like these extra nutrients in our body can be really, really beneficial to our overall health and our mental health specifically. The other way that herbs can work is they can help, some of them help to reduce anxiety. And these herbs will have both long-standing traditional use as well as clinical research. Specifically, the ones that I'm going to talk about all have good clinical research to back them up. So they can help to support anxiety. Some of them can help with sleep. And then there's this really fun class of herbs called adaptogens. And I think you said you've mentioned adaptogens before in your podcast. And I love adaptogens. It's like a concept we don't have in Western medicine, but it is these herbs that help to support body's physiological response to stress. So whether that stress is mental or emotional or physical, like an illness, it helps to adapt your body's stress response and bring it back into balance. And it's a really special class of herbs that I love to use, particularly for folks when they have like long-term or chronic stress issues. Adaptogens are so beautiful for that. So one of my favorite adaptogens is ashwagandha. Ashwagandha, the Latin name for that is Withania somnifera. And even from that Latin name, we get a bit of an idea of what that plant does. So somnifera or somnifera, means to sleep, right? And so ashwagandha is a traditional Indian medicine. It's been used for centuries, like thousands of years in India and their traditional medicine system called Ayurveda. And it's a tonic herb, so it helps to just again like balance out those issues when they arise. Ashwagandha is a really grounding herb, so it doesn't have any stimulating sort of aspect. Sometimes some of the adaptogens are a little bit more stimulating, so we use them for people with lower energy, but I find that most people these days are overstimulated. We have way too much caffeine and way too much screen time and way too much stimulation, and we need actually to calm our nervous systems down. And ashwagandha does that really, really beautifully. We use the root of ashwagandha, and it doesn't taste very nice. In fact, one of the translations of the word ashwagandha is smells like horse, which can kind of give you an idea of it's got a very earthy type of scent. But another translation is strong like horse. So it really helps to build resilience. That's how I like to think of ashwagandha. And because it doesn't taste nice, I don't usually use it in a tea. Sometimes you can like mix a little bit of powder in with a smoothie, or you can get like a tincture, which is when a herb is extracted in a mix of alcohol and water. That's another good way to take it as well. Sorry.
I like that. It smells like horse, and then it makes you strong like a horse. I haven't noticed the bad taste because I do mix it with my smoothie every day.
Right. Yeah. I think like you can mix it in, and lots of people will have it like with coffee or chocolate or something, like a hot chocolate ashwagandha, and that sort of masks any bad taste that there might be. It's earthy.
I'm going to have to try it, but I think we're not used to bitters. We're so used to sweet and savory, but we need to expand our palate and try some of these teas, like even the nettle, like you said, it's not necessarily the best tasting, but once you get used to it, I don't mind the earthy. But I think we have to expose ourselves, with our palate, we have to try something at least 10 times before we can decide whether we like it or not. But I think most of us just try it once and say, "Ew, no, that's not for me." But
Yeah. Yeah,
I think if you
exactly.
do anything with Chinese medicine or yeah, with Chinese medicine, they give you the most gross smelling herbs to mix together and make a tea out of it. And event the first I remember the first week I might have been like, oh, this is so awful. I can't even handle this. But by I don't know, a month I didn't even notice it.
Yeah, and that bitter sort of taste that's a really that's like a whole other podcast episode that we could talk about, how important that bitter taste is for our health and our digestive system. And one of the things that I'm going to chat about is that gut brain connection, and that bitter taste is really important for the gut brain connection as well.
Okay. Did you want to kind of go into it a little bit here before we go into the next question?
Yeah, sure we can. Yeah, so that gut brain connection that we're learning so much more about, there's research coming out every day about how, both our brain function affects our digestive system, but also how it's a two-way street, and our gut function, our digestive system actually affects our brain function as well. And so that whole bitter taste is so important for digestive health, but also it can be really important for improving mental health and brain health. And there are a couple herbs that I really love that work both on the gut and the brain. Chamomile is one of them, which is one of my favorite childhood herbs. And I love chamomile. I feel like it's one of those plants that people know about and they underestimate it a little bit, but it's really powerful. It's got tons of research for anxiety and sleep, and really helpful in children and the elderly. And it also works on the digestive tract. Lemon balm is another one that I love for both gut health and brain health. And I just think it's so interesting that we as humans are just learning about this gut brain connection, but these plants have these actions that work together, just like really neatly packaged up in one little flower. I just think it's such a cool concept that nature really knew about this way before we had done research on it.
I think it's so interesting that a lot of us use herbs without really knowing what they do. Like we might add mint because to our alcoholic drinks because we think it just smells good, or we like mint and basil for our pasta or whatever, but we don't really know what they do. And I think that's why I really wanted to have this discussion, and that we can use some of these mindfully whenever we're not feeling well. So if you have chamomile leaves or little flowers, and you can make a tea out of it, or you can even buy chamomile tea. Um, there's also there are other roots like maca and ashwagandha, and what else? There's ginseng. There's so many other adaptogens that we can include in our diet. I think it's just overwhelming. We don't know how to do this. But I also want to mention that although a lot of these herbs and plant-based supplements are safe generally, there can be a downside. Can you talk a little bit about the downside, and then the side effects that we can expect, and then how can we use them safely and be more mindful about it?
For sure. Such good questions. So I think as far as like where to start, I think starting where you're familiar is a great place to go, because you're right. There is an overwhelming number of herbs. I don't know if you can see behind me, but like this is my little herb cabinet that I've got behind me. And in there, I've got hundreds of different herbs. And that's just a snippet. So start with where you're familiar, start with what grows around you. Um, and just start playing with these things. I think that's one of the best places to begin, is with what is familiar and what is close to you. So again, and those really safe herbs like chamomile, lemon balm, they're really good places to start. They're very common. They're really easy to come across. They generally have a really good safety profile. So the safety of herbs is a whole big conversation, and it just depends on which herb. So my general sort of information around safety information when it comes to herbs is that if you have a serious medical condition, or if you are on, serious or important medication, it's really worthwhile having a conversation with a practitioner before you start using herbs on your own. So, and I would generally, if you can, I would access a herbalist or like a naturopathic doctor or somebody who's trained in herb drug interactions. Your pharmacist is not always trained in herb drug interactions. Your doctor is not always trained in herb drug interactions. They're generally probably going to say no because they're erring on the side of caution, which is totally understandable. So try and find somebody who has a real deep training in herbal medicine and knows their stuff with herb drug interactions. So yeah, if you have a serious medical condition, if you're on serious medication, please speak to somebody first before self-prescribing. In saying that, so those 3 herbs that I've mentioned today are generally considered very safe, really, really low side effect profile, long-term traditional use of using them all the time. So these are other ways that I look at kind of safety issues as well as, has a herb been used for a long time, or is it kind of like a new invention? The other thing is the way that you take it. That affects its potency and how it works. So for example, chamomile and lemon balm are both beautiful as teas. So all a tea is like, the leaves or the flowers or whatever part of the plant that we use, extracted in hot water, that pulls out the water soluble constituents of that plant, those chemicals that we want, and you can drink it. And it's like effective, but it's reasonably low dose. It's not super, super strong. Where herbs sometimes get into trouble with safety is in the more like modern ways that we process them. So tablets and capsules, and specifically if we artificially extract specific chemicals from a plant and and make them stronger. So that's kind of like a newer issue that we run into. And that's where our risk of side effects and interactions becomes a little bit more problematic. Whereas these really traditional, longstanding uses in things like teas tend to be a lot less concerning as far as their safety or side effects. In saying that, there are herbs which do warrant, having a discussion with a practitioner or working with a practitioner before you even think about using them. A couple of my favorite herbs, which are really, really powerful, particularly for mental health issues, are kava and St. John's wort, but those are both herbs that really need to be worked with a practitioner if you're going to look at using them.
Yeah, those are really, I'm glad you mentioned that because they are safe for the most part, but it's always important to talk to your doctor before adding anything to your diet and taking it in as a supplement. But there is a lot of education around it. But one thing I want to mention is that a lot of our great grandparents and grandparents were relying on these things. And over time, we lost contact. We lost touch with what is important. And one of the stories that I remember hearing a long time ago was how in the Amazon jungle, they have all the medicinal plants that we go out there to go. They have it in their backyard. But they were so used to going to the local pharmacy that the Cousteau family, the Jacques Cousteau family, the grandchildren, had to go in and educate the locals on the plants in their backyards they can continue to use as medicine because they were just so used to, well, I'll just get it from the pharmacy. Yeah. Instead of learning how to make the teas. Like I had a friend, she's Mexican, but her family was very traditional in the things that the medicines that they use. And she would always make all these tinctures. I mean, these little teas. She would boil all these leaves together and make a tea. And I was just so impressed with, at that time, she was so young, but she was so into this natural way of taking care of her body and taking care of her of her health and making sure that she's proactive. I know that we like we talked about, we use mint all the time. We use basil. Chamomile is a regular staple, but there are other lesser known herbs, I guess, that we don't really know about, but we should be open to trying. But one thing I'm really going back to the adaptogens. I was very impressed with rhodiola and how much research has been done on rhodiola and how amazing it is and how much investment the Russians actually put into studying rhodiola just for the stamina aspect of it for their soldiers. Can you talk a little bit about rhodiola and what it is and how we can use it and what benefits it might have?
Yeah. Yeah, rhodiola is a beautiful adaptogen. It definitely sits more along that like stimulating kind of side of adaptogen. So I always feel like there's like a little bit of like there's a gauge of how stimulating your adaptogens are. And rhodiola is definitely in that higher level, but it is very good for improving stamina. It's a root that we use. Rhodiola is grown, yeah, in Russia, in those really northern kind of areas. Sometimes they call it like Arctic ginseng because it has that sort of similar properties. So again, it's an adaptogen, so it helps to like adapt your body to physical, mental, or emotional stress. And you're right, this time a lot of the research on rhodiola has been on supporting the body's physical reaction to stress, and a lot of time like lots of exercise or really cold temperatures, things like that. So I really like with rhodiola. Again, I think it's a little bit harder to find in like its basic form and its crude form. So sometimes you can get a powder that you could like add to a smoothie or something. Like I said, it's a root like ashwagandha, so you might want to add it into something. You can get capsules for rhodiola as well and take those. You don't want to take it all the time, again, just because it can be a little bit stimulating. But I find in times of stress, or, you know, like say you're running a business and you're getting ready to launch a new program, and you know that you kind of got like a 3 or 4 week window where you're just going to have to work really, really hard. Getting those kind of little plant helpers in there during that time frame is a really, really nice way to use it. So that's like a perfect time that I would use rhodiola short term to get me through something and to help my body sort of adapt and manage that stress in a better kind of way.
It really helps us not get to that exhaustion level of stress because a lot of us push our body to that brink of exhaustion, right? And
Yeah.
this kind of keeps us balanced.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
Another one that I really like, and maybe you can talk more about, is holy basil. I know I mentioned basil. We add basil to our pasta sauce and all of that, but how is holy basil different than regular basil? And then what are some ways that we can use that for stress management?
Yeah. Yeah, holy basil is another really beautiful herb that we use for stress. So the botanical name for holy basil is Oxymum tenuflorum or Oxymum sanctum. And again, it's another Ayurvedic herb traditionally used in India. So it's different than regular basil in that regular basil doesn't really have the stress support that holy basil does. They're both very good for digestion. They both have lots of what we call volatile oils. So a plant that has like lots of really smelly chemicals, those volatile oils tend to have certain properties. So they tend to be a little bit antimicrobial, a little bit good for digestion. That's kind of like a hint from a plant that it's good for those certain things. But holy basil likes to be grown in the sun, so very much like regular basil in that kind of way. But it is another beautiful adaptogen, less stimulating than rhodiola, maybe slightly more than ashwagandha, but very much on that lower, quieter end. Has lots of research on it for stress, anxiety, and it just feels like it's a nourishing sort of supportive herb that works so beautifully. I use it all the time with rose. Just find Tulsi and rose. Tulsi is another name for holy basil. Work really, really well together. There's like a bit of an energetic thing that happens with Tulsi and rose together, I find. And I like tend to be, I'm a pretty clinical herbalist. I like to read research and stuff. But plants have lots of things in them that we don't know about yet. And so I really find that Tulsi and rose together are really good for aching hearts and like deep sadness is what I tend to use those plants for. That's my favorite way to use it. But yeah, also very good for digestion. So another one that supports that gut brain connection as well.
When you talked about the combination between the Tulsi and the rose, it made me think of Schisandra and rhodiola. What's the connection between the two of them, and why is Schisandra? Because actually, from what I'm hearing, is taking a Schisandra rhodiola combination will help the medication for antidepressant. So SSRIs, it will actually make it more effective. Can you talk about what that connection is and why Schisandra and rhodiola is such a good combination?
Mm. I'm actually not familiar with that specific research about it supporting antidepressant medication. I can guess as to why that might be. So Schisandra is a herb that we use for stress. It also supports like digestion and liver function a little bit. And I wonder if that might be part of why it is helping the antidepressant medication to work better. Whether it means that it's like helping the medication stay in the body a little bit longer, I'm not 100% sure. But the combination of the two is so nice. And I find this a lot, that herbs, they work synergistically. So, whereas like together they're more than the sum of their parts. And we find that a lot when we do research on these combinations of herbs, and it tends to be ones that have been traditionally used together. And so Schisandra is a traditional Chinese medicine herb, but a lot of that area also is, it's close enough to Russia to have some crossover there, right? Which is where rhodiola comes from originally. And so that combination of herbs is really, really beautiful for supporting, again, like that, like digestion side of things, that liver side of things. And those issues in our digestive system and like our liver and our detoxification function, those can really affect our mental health as well, right? Like, for example, just off the top of my head, if you're constipated, you're probably not going to be feeling very good, So getting those really physiological issues out of the way can be really beneficial for our stress and our mental health as well. Never mind that, we need to be able to properly absorb and excrete, nutrients from our food before our body can uptake them and use them efficiently, which goes into how our brain chemistry works as well.
Well, even with mental health, there's a lot of reasons that we have anxiety and depression. It's not just one thing. It's not just we're feeling depressed because something external happened. A lot of times it's an imbalance in our body. Sometimes it's an inflammation in our gut and our brain. Sometimes it's a liver issue where we're not processing the stress or whatever we're not processing, and our liver is blocked, and so we're having more anxiety. Sometimes it's our thyroid, and this is why we can use herbs and balance our body. And I love adaptogens because it literally goes to where you need that balance, right? It doesn't target one specific area. It goes where the weakness is that, I mean, you tell me. I mean, you're the herbalist.
Yeah, and I guess like different herbs have an affinity to like different organs, So when you said thyroid, for example, like ashwagandha actually also has research on it for supporting low thyroid function, which again is one of the reasons that we think it might be supportive for low mood. It also is very supportive for immune function, right? We all know that when we're fighting a cold or a flu, that our mental health is not at its best, right? So if underlying your anxiety or your low mood is, like you said, a thyroid issue or an immune issue, adaptogens particularly, because they work on that physiological stressors as well, which often does relate to immune function. They just, yeah, like you said, they just kind of go where they need to go because they're non-specific, which feels a little bit counterintuitive, but they're just amazing.
Well, that's what makes them so amazing. And that I've done so many episodes about the connection between food and mood, and how that's important because ultimately it also connects to our gut, and then it also connects to our liver, and it also balances out our hormones. And in my treatment with anxiety, I always like to go to the root issues. A lot of people just want to talk about their symptoms of anxiety, but I feel like it's a better use of my time to go, what is causing that anxiety? Let's look at the root cause. And a lot of times, if we end up making changes at the root level, we end up feeling better mentally. And this is a great way to incorporate herbs. I know we talked about a lot of the medicinal herbs that we can add and help us feel better mentally and physically. But are spices considered herbs as well? Are they part of the herb family? And how can we use herbs and spices in our daily cooking, and just add them to our just daily life?
Yeah. Yeah. I love this conversation. I like to call this kitchen medicine. And it's kind of like you said, stuff that your grandparents knew that we've sort of lost touch with, which I just think is such a bummer. because it's something that we can all access every day. So yeah, a herb is kind of like, it's a generic term for basically any plant that is supportive to your health. That's sort of how I define it. And kitchen spices definitely fall into that category. So some of my favorite kitchen spices to use, just like in your cooking to support your overall health. So ginger is one of my top favorite plants of all time. I use ginger all the time, both kind of like in a concentrated form medicinally for clients, and I'm always getting people to add it into their diet, because I really think the more that we add these little bits and pieces into our daily life, the less that we need to rely on the big guns later on or down the line. So I love ginger. I just make ginger tea all the time. I use it for digestion, for nausea. It's a very warming herb. So it's good if you feel the cold a lot, good for circulation support as well, good for colds, good for runny noses. And you can just add it to your food. So I always keep like fresh ginger root in my freezer, just because I find it keeps really well. And then I just grate it frozen and add it to, curry or soups or stews or any kind of like stir fry dish that I'm having. So you could definitely use that as well. Dry ginger is totally reasonable to use as well. I just find it's not quite as punchy as fresh stuff. If you can get fresh, it's definitely better. But yeah, dried totally works as well. Some of the other kitchen spices that I love to use, oregano is brilliant. Again, because it has that really good, strong smell, that it's like a little bit antimicrobial and a little bit good for your digestion. And so I use oregano all the time, like in pasta dishes or that more Italian sort of flavoring. Same with rosemary. Rosemary is beautiful. My favorite way to actually eat rosemary is on popcorn. There was a restaurant in a town that I used to live in that used to put sea salt and rosemary on their popcorn, and it changed my life. And rosemary is, again, really good for digestion, but also really good for circulation. And there's quite a bit of research on rosemary for memory as well. And it actually supports liver function and detoxification in a really gentle way as well. So again, just like something you can add to your popcorn or add in your meat dishes, that is so brilliant for that. One more that I'll just talk about is turmeric. And turmeric is like really having a moment right now as far as being sort of like a trendy herb. And medicinally, we use it for liver function. It's really anti-inflammatory, tons and tons and tons of research coming out on turmeric. And traditionally used in India as like, one of the main spices in a curry. And what's interesting with turmeric is when they were kind of researching it and trying to like find a way to make it work and sort of see what was like the magic bullet within the turmeric that worked, they were finding that it wasn't very well absorbed. And then what they discovered was that when you added some fat and some black pepper to turmeric, that your body absorbed the beneficial compounds better. And like, what is in a curry if not, some coconut oil or some coconut cream, a little bit of fat and black pepper, which I just think is so interesting that like traditionally we've been eating this plant this way for a really, really long time. And then we kind of like figured it out by researching it, but really we knew it all along.
Well, I'm from Afghanistan and I have a cookbook. It's all about Afghan food and Afghan cooking. And one thing I really, really stress is the spices. And in fact, I think my follow-up book will be all about spices and its benefit, because there are 5 spices that we normally use for every dish. And in fact, one of the reviews on my book is it's so boring because we use the same spices over and over again, but it adds a different flavor to the different type of dish. And we use coriander, turmeric, black pepper, salt, and ginger in almost every dish. Yeah. And one thing that I found is that the turmeric has to be cooked. And a lot of us that like in India and Iran and Afghanistan or any country that uses a lot of these spices, like Afghan food is not spicy hot. It is full of spice though. It's full of flavor. Yeah. And so, but all of our spices are cooked. And what I'm finding, this new trend of taking it all in a supplement and putting it in a pill and not cooking it people aren't absorbing it. And they're in fact wasting a lot of money. what I love is making golden milk and making that turmeric paste.
It's so yummy.
It's so good for you. And I have a recipe I give to all of my patients. I'm like, just try this. It's good for so many things. It's good for depression. It's good for anxiety. It's good for making you feel good and your immune system. But I cook my turmeric for 7 minutes on low heat, and then I save that as a paste, and then you can make golden milk from that. Has that been your understanding of turmeric being cooked? I mean, I'm making that conclusion based on every culture I know that uses turmeric. They're not putting it in a pill, they're cooking it.
Totally. And I think, yeah, it just comes back to sort of, what I was saying with like, we research these things, but really when we go back to the traditional way that people have been using them for like hundreds or thousands of years, most of the time we got it right by practicing, right? Because if things didn't work, then there was no reason to keep doing it. There was no like economic benefit to that. And so like, I always think like we can really trust our traditional use of things because we knew that like, oh, if we ate that, someone died, so we probably shouldn't keep eating that, right? And we also knew if we ate that, then hey, lots of people felt better, so we kept doing that. Like there's a lot to be said for that. And I think that gets thrown out sometimes in favor of research. And I think research is interesting and helpful and can be beneficial. And I think we always need to pair it with a really common sense and in-depth look at how people have been using these foods and these spices for millennia.
Well, I think thousands of years worth of research or history, and then thousands and thousands, and if not millions of participants should be a good indicator that certain things work. And we don't need necessarily scientific data for everything. Yeah. Another thing that we add to all of our tea, because we drink a lot of green tea, and green tea is really good for you and has a lot of benefits, but we add cardamom to our green tea. And the other day I forgot to add cardamom. I was like, green tea doesn't really taste that good without the cardamom. So I'm so used to it.
Yeah. Cardamom is a beautiful herb. And I actually don't know much about the research of it, but again, like very good for digestion. And there is stuff around it for mental health specifically as well. I've never had it in green tea, but I'm going to go make that this afternoon now.
Oh, it's so good. Just buy the pods and grind them as you need them, because then they'll stay fresh that way. But it's also good for brain activity as well. And a lot of people are doing research about its benefits for Alzheimer's and dementia. So there's cardamom is something and then we also use it in our baked goods. And it's such an amazing combination with like cookies and just dessert. I just love cardamom so much in so many different ways. But I wish that people would incorporate that more. I remember going to Spain once, and then from Spain, we went to Morocco. And I remember the Spaniards didn't like Moroccan food because of all the different flavors. They liked their food bland. Right. And I just thought that's so sad that there's actual cultures that don't want to incorporate spices because they're missing out on so many benefits, but also the taste, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like my white ancestors definitely like bland food, and it's a real failing of our culture, I feel like.
And I think this is why we gravitate towards certain, like Indian food is popular for a reason. And it's not just because of the curry, it's all the different spices and the scents and the smells. And I hope people discover Afghan food too, because it is super, super delicious. And I'm just not biased at all here. Plug Afghan food for a minute.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. And I think this is what's so interesting to me about herbs and herbal medicine as well, is that it's like a whole sensory experience. And I think that's another thing that's really missing when you take your herbs in a pill, right? Is, that bitter flavor or the flavor of cardamom, which you just could not get. It's such a poor substitute for the real thing, And so we kind of think that we can concentrate these things and put them in really high doses, but that's not necessarily how it was meant to be used or how it's been traditionally used. And yeah, there's something missing with that, I think. It's a whole
taking it in a pill, you're not tasting it at all.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned lemon balm. I've always been interested in lemon balm. I hear a lot about it. I know there's also an essential oil that's really calming. Can you tell us some ways that people can use lemon balm and what it's good for?
Yeah. I love lemon balm. I think it's one of my top favorite herbs, although I think I say that about every herb. Lemon balm is a mint family herb, so it grows really, really easily. It's one of the plants that I often recommend people start with. Even if you have like just a little balcony space, you could totally grow some lemon balm yourself. And then you kind of get that whole experience of the plant itself. So it's got these beautiful fuzzy little green leaves and it smells very lemony. And so lemon balm has lots and lots of research as well as lots of historical use for anxiety. It's very uplifting, I find. So it does have research on it for sleep, but I tend to use it more during the day as like an uplifting anti-anxiety sort of support. Um, it's another one that's really, really good for digestion, like I said. So it has that sort of gut brain connection help with it. And yeah, there's lots of research on it. There was like a clinical trial done in, I'm going to say 2019, that they used lemon balm for patients who were anxious undergoing cardiac surgery, because who wouldn't be anxious undergoing cardiac surgery, and found that it was really beneficial for people who had had this big surgery and who were undergoing this big surgery. And the cool thing about that kind of research is it also shows, again, that safety profile, because if they're using this herb when people are having, you know, a major surgery, it shows you that they're not concerned about its safety with the medications that they might be undergoing, that it's safe when you have heart concerns, those kinds of things as well. So lemon balm is beautiful in a tea. It's the main way that I use it for sure. Again, because it tastes really lovely. It smells really beautiful. Again, you're going to get that whole sensory experience. And yeah, it's a really easy plant to grow. So I would highly encourage you to like find some lemon balm seeds or buy a little plant. It's pretty available at garden centers. I saw some at Home Depot the other day, and it's really, really easy to grow. And then you can like really get to know lemon balm and play with it and see the effects on yourself as well. Another one it's really safe for children and up to the elderly as well. So there's like research on it for infants even. So it's a very, very nice one to play with because it has a good safety profile.
And it's because of everything you just said that I've been so curious about it. But for some reason, I keep hearing it's so easy to grow. I've tried it. I'm in Arizona, so I can understand Arizona weather might not be too conducive to it. But I've tried it in so many different settings, and it's just not. Maybe it's my seeds. I don't know. I got to try it again. But it's because of everything you said. I've been reading so much about it. It's such an amazing herb, and I just have not been successful in growing it.
Just buy some like loose leaf tea from your local health shop. It'll be okay. You'll
That's
still get a similar experience.
That's what I need to do. My basil plant's doing really well though, but I haven't been able to grow holy basil yet either.
I'm going to try holy basil this year for the first time. I've never grown it before either. We'll see.
Yeah, I just want to see the difference between regular basil. I mean, and then basil, there's so many different types of basil as well. So it's kind of hard to figure it all out.
Could go on for days.
Yeah. I think just trying, like you said, growing, having a little herb garden and growing it in your windowsill and just start using some of them into your dishes and see what it does and tasting them. Just eat them from the leaf and just see what it's like.
And that's like really the safest way to play with it as well. You know, when you're playing with it in a culinary sort of way, you're not going to run into trouble, like I said, with the interactions and things like that, you know? And yeah, and then you just really get to know those plants and see the effects and the benefits for yourself and your own family. It's such a nice way to do it.
So I'm just becoming familiar with parsley. First, for a long time, I used to not like parsley. I didn't like the taste. And the last year, I've just been really focusing on parsley for some reason. I don't know why. I'm just drawn to parsley and I want to know more about the benefits of parsley. And I'm assuming that that would be considered an herb that's beneficial, right?
Yeah, I feel like we don't use it tons medicinally. It has a little bit of like diuretic sort of action, so a little bit supportive to like the kidneys and urinary tract. It's super high in vitamin C. Like nutritionally, parsley is really outstanding. That's probably the main way that I would use it. Again, I would never like bother drying it and putting it in tea. I would just always, as much as possible, use it fresh, add it to dishes, put it in your cooking. I don't think you need to take it in any kind of other way other than with your food. But yeah, really, really high in nutrients. And yeah, a little bit supportive for that kidneys and urinary tract.
Well, I think I like parsley and cilantro and other herbs that are really good for detoxification. They
Mm,
really support, like cilantro is really good with detoxifying heavy metals from our body. And we use cilantro, like I said, we use fresh cilantro in our cooking, but
yeah,
also the seeds,
yeah.
which is called coriander. And we ground that and we put it in our dishes. Um, so cilantro, parsley. What else would be really good as far as a detox or just supporting our body?
Mm.
Dill, we dry. I mean, you mentioned drying, so we dry mint. I do dry the mint, and we crush it and we sprinkle it on yogurt and dishes. We also dry parsley and dill, and what else? There's a lot of different herbs and spices that you can dry as well. Like you said, dried ginger. We're doing the powder. We
Yep,
sprinkle that in our food. So there's different ways to take it. Like we can have it fresh. We can
yep.
freeze it, and then we can also dry it and then sprinkle it on food.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a whole world of other herbs as well that are really beneficial for liver support and detoxification. My top favorite herb for that is milk thistle, which is actually
Mhm.
a thistle. And it's got these beautiful kind of white veins all through it. It's like a noxious weed in some part of the world, which is often the case with a lot of medicinal plants, actually. But milk thistle is amazing, and the research on it for supporting liver function is exceptional. And it's another one that is surprisingly very, very safe. They've tested milk thistle with lots of big medications, and it, even though it supports liver function, which sometimes means that it would make your medicines less effective because it would push them through the body more quickly, it's never been shown to be problematic like that. But the benefits of it are just phenomenal. In Europe, actually, milk thistle is a registered medicine. They have an injectable form because it's the only known treatment for poisoning with death cap mushrooms, which is just kind of shows you how powerful plants can be.
And it makes me sad too that, I don't know how it is in Canada, but the homeowners association in Arizona, at least, or anywhere in the United States, they're just so militant about weeds. And a lot of these weeds have medicinal properties, and like dandelion. I mean, they grow like wildfire. They take over, and they take over your yard. It's true, but there's not only are they supporting the bee colonies and they're feeding the bees, but there's also medicinal benefits to us. And we'll go to the store and pay $2 a pound for dandelion leaves, and then we kill the ones that are growing in our backyard. So it's just this
I
confusion.
know. It's so crazy. I often say that my goal as a herbalist is to get people to walk down the street and say, "Oh, what a lovely dandelion."
Yes. Yes, or any of the weird things that are growing and
Yeah.
out of nowhere. And I have this one native plant that just grew out of nowhere. It has the little white, fuzzy leaves, but it's green. It's like greenish white. It's supposed to be a Native American plant that a lot of people have used for medicinal benefits. I don't know too much about it, but it just randomly grows in my backyard. I'm not going to destroy it. But I know that because of HOA and because of the beautification of our neighborhoods, we're killing our weeds, we're destroying the bees, we're really affecting our lives in a lot of negative ways because we don't understand something. The best thing in our mind at that time is to kill it and destroy it. But I think the more we understand dandelions and milkweed and all these other invasive weeds and their benefits, we're not going to be so quick to do that.
Yeah. And I really think as well, like there could be a really co-beneficial thing happening if somebody, say, approached your homeowners association and said, "Hey, if you don't spray your dandelions, I'll harvest them, I'll collect them, I'll get rid of them." And then that person could go and like sell them off to Whole Foods for $2 a pound, like you said, or go on to make their own really beautiful medicines. Dandelion is another really beautiful herb for
Mhm.
detoxification, supporting liver function. You can totally eat the leaves. They're a bitter green, really good for digestion. Like the list goes on and on.
Another one that just came to mind is arugula. Like we add it to our salad, but a lot of us, we don't even know what the benefit is really. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a bitter herb, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So arugula is another really good bitter. And you're right. Like we've really sidestepped bitter foods in general, and like particularly in the Western diet, we like in favor of salty and sweet. But that bitters, and like traditionally in France, for example, you'd have an aperitif before a meal, or sometimes we would have like a salad before our meal, right, with like a lemon and vinegar kind of combo on it to support that digestion before a meal. And that's really the purpose of that. It kind of becomes a cultural element, but it has a really beneficial physiological support as well.
Yeah, we've lost so much of that way of eating, the intuitive eating, the healthy way of eating. And we've simplified, but we've removed the essential things that are really, really necessary. But we're having the issues we're having because we've lost that touch. And I wanted to bring you on here because of your knowledge and awareness about herbs, because I talk about it all the time. I'm definitely not an herbalist. I'm not an expert. It's just my own experience and my own cultural background with herbs. So I just love this conversation and this topic. And I hope, like you said, people will walk down the street and be like, wow, what a beautiful dandelion, or I love that weed. That's my favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like what you just said is such an important point. You don't need to be a herbalist. You don't need to be an expert. This is kind of this sort of information, and these plants belong to all of us, and we should all have access, and we can all start having access by playing with them through our food, or by having little teas, or by having a little herb garden. And it just takes those little steps for us to all kind of take it back a little bit for our own selves and for our own health of ourselves and our families.
Oh, definitely. So I know that you've been fascinated with herbs since you were little, but knowing what you know now about herbs and all the information that you have, what would you tell that younger self of yours about herbs?
I would just say keep playing with it. Like I think that herbs and herbal medicine can be really fun. I think we're all drawn to plants. Everybody I know as a kid who played outside made little concoctions with sticks and things like that. And I think that there's real value in that. And that the more we kind of stay connected to that younger playful part of ourselves, the more likely we are to sort of be curious about the world around us, and just to start asking those questions, oh, I wonder what that plant does. I wonder if there's a different way to approach the dandelions in our garden, those kinds of questions. So just be curious and start playing.
Yeah, I love that. Just try it and then see what comes out of it, right? And just not be afraid of it. A lot of them are super delicious. I know we talked about the bitters, but some of them are really delicious. And I know that we can incorporate them in so many different ways and enhance the flavor of our foods and make food fun again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So where can people find you and connect with you? Are you on social media? And where can people follow you?
Yeah, for sure. So my business is called Pahudakawa Health. A Pahudakawa is a beautiful tree that's native to New Zealand, which is where I studied herbal medicine and lived for a very long time, in case you're wondering. So my website is called pahudakawahealth.com, and maybe we can link it in the notes or something down below. And I'm on social media, both Facebook and Instagram, at Pahudakawa Health. And my name is Emily.
That's a mouthful. I'll definitely add that to the show notes.
I know. I refuse to change it, even though it's not great for pronunciation for most folks.
No, but it kind of makes you aware. Is that an herb in New Zealand?
It's a beautiful tree that blooms bright red at Christmas time in December.
Oh,
It's so, so gorgeous. I've never used it medicinally, but I just love it.
oh, that is awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your information and your wisdom and your knowledge. That was really a really good discussion. And maybe we can have you back to talk about more in-depth information about the bitters and everything else.
We could go on for days. It's been super fun. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.